I was standing in the wreckage of my greenhouse, glass shards crunching under my shoes, the air still carrying that sharp scent of torn earth and broken plastic, when my parents' words echoed in my head, "You need to forgive him. He's your brother. Forgive him." For turning months of my work, my savings, my dream, into rubble, just because he thought I needed to be taught a lesson. I looked around at the twisted metal frames, the mangled plants I had nurtured from seeds, the irrigation system I had designed down to the last detail. It wasn't just a greenhouse he had destroyed. It was $22,000 of my life, my hope for independence, the one thing that was finally mine, not theirs. And he had stomped it into the ground with a smirk, as if I were a child who needed discipline, as if this was some kind of game. But this wasn't a game, and I wasn't a child anymore. My hand shook as I picked up a piece of glass, the sun, catching its edge like a blade, and I thought back to every time my parents had brushed off his cruelty with the same tired phrase, "Boys will be boys." He didn't mean it. "You're too sensitive." But this time was different. This time there were receipts, invoices, bank transfers, and a broken dream I could put a price tag on. $22,000. 22,000 reasons not to forgive. And yet there they were, standing in front of me in their kitchen, hours later, sipping coffee like it was just another Sunday, telling me to let it go, telling me blood was thicker than glass, than soil, than sweat. I stared at them, silent, because deep down, I already knew something they didn't. I wasn't going to forgive. I was going to make them see, make him see, exactly what it cost to break me. And when I was done, none of them would ever look at me the same way again. I didn't just wake up one day and decide I wanted a greenhouse. It wasn't some random hobby I picked up because I was bored. For years, I had been working extra shifts at the cafe, saving tips in a jar I kept hidden behind old cookbooks in my closet, while my friends were spending their weekends at concerts or vacations. I was poring over catalogs of seeds and equipment, sketching layouts on scrap paper, and researching irrigation systems late into the night. I knew down to the cent how much everything would cost, and I knew it would take me years to get there. But I also knew it would be worth it. This wasn't just about plants. It was about building something that belonged to me, something no one could take away or control. My brother, though, never saw it that way. To him, I was the overly serious sibling, the one who didn't know how to have fun, the one who needed to be put in her place. He had been the golden child all his life, the one who made mistakes and had them erased with a smile. When he crashed Dad's car at 17, my parents paid for it and scolded me for nagging. When he dropped out of college, they said he just needed time to figure himself out. And when he borrowed money, he never paid back. I was told to be understanding. Meanwhile, every cent I earned was scrutinized. If I wanted something, I had to prove I deserved it. That's why I poured so much of myself into the greenhouse. Every panel of glass, every tray of seedlings was proof I could make something without their help, something real. So when I walked out that morning and saw the damage, I thought at first it had to be a storm. The door was hanging off its hinges. Whole sections of the roof collapsed. Rows of plants uprooted and trampled. But then I saw his work boots abandoned, in the mud, and the truth hit me harder than any storm could. He had done this deliberately. Later, when I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. He leaned back in Dad's old recliner, smirk, tugging at his lips, and said, "You were getting too obsessed. Thought I'd do you a favor. Life's not about plants, sis. It's about knowing your place, my place." As if he had the right to decide where I belonged. My parents sat there listening, not horrified, not angry, just tired. Mom even reached over and squeezed his hand, like he was the victim. Then Dad gave me that look, the one I'd seen 1,000 times before, and said quietly, "He's your brother. Family comes first. Forgive him." I wanted to scream, to throw every shattered piece of glass onto the table in front of them and shout, "This is what family looks like when you let him destroy everything I build." But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at them, memorizing their faces. Because something in me was shifting. They thought they had taught me all my life to forgive, to bend, to accept. But this time, I wasn't bending. This time, I was going to teach them. The night after it happened, I couldn't sleep, not even for a second. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the greenhouse the way it had looked the week before. Sunlight warming the glass panes, tiny green shoots reaching up from the soil, the misting system ticking softly in the background. I had planted lavender along the edges because I wanted it to smell like peace when I walked inside. I had tomatoes already flowering, cucumbers climbing the trellis, even a row of strawberries that I'd babied through the spring frost. I used to joke that my greenhouse was my cathedral, my quiet place, my sanctuary, and now it was rubble. I sat at my kitchen table with the invoices spread out like a crime scene, highlighter marks still fresh from when I'd calculated every cost. $22,000. It wasn't just the glass and the wood. It was the irrigation pump, the grow lights, the soil amendments, the seeds I had ordered from 3 different suppliers. I had proof of all of it, page after page, evidence. My brother's voice replayed in my head. Life's not about plants. It's about knowing your place. What place? The one where I worked until my body ached, and he still got to decide whether it mattered. The one where I paid and sacrificed, and he got to destroy. The words rattled inside me, each repetition harder, sharper, until they didn't hurt anymore. They solidified. I realized then, this wasn't just about my brother's arrogance or my parents' blind favoritism. This was about a pattern that had defined my whole life. When he broke something, I was told to forgive. When he stole, I was told to share. When he hurt me, I was told to be the bigger person. And every time I swallowed it, they called it peace. But it wasn't peace. It was silence. It was erasure. I thought about the girl I had been when I started saving for the greenhouse. I was 19, naive, still hoping that maybe if I worked hard enough, they'd finally respect me. Now I was standing in my mid-20s, with broken glass at my feet, and the same old script shoved in my face. Forgive him. Family comes first. But family wasn't supposed to look like this. Family wasn't supposed to cost $22,000 and leave me with nothing but ashes. By dawn I was still awake, but I wasn't crying anymore. My hands were steady as I gathered every receipt, every bank statement, every photograph I had taken of the greenhouse when it stood intact. I put them in a folder. Evidence, plain and cold. My parents had spent my whole life protecting him from consequences. This time, I wasn't going to help them. This time, I was going to protect myself. The morning sun cut through the blinds, and I felt like it was slicing straight into my skin. My eyes burned from not sleeping, but there was no fog in my head, no confusion. I had clarity, sharp and cold. My brother thought destroying my greenhouse would teach me a lesson, and in a way, he was right. He taught me that forgiving him only bred more destruction. I pulled on a jacket, tucked the folder of receipts under my arm, and stepped outside. The wreckage was still there, dew glistening on broken glass, as if the earth was mocking me with its beauty. I snapped more photos, close-ups of shattered irrigation lines, the ripped plastic mulch, the collapsed trellis where my cucumbers should have been climbing. Every picture was a nail in his coffin. My phone buzzed while I was crouched down in the mud. A message from Mom. Come for lunch today. We need to talk. Don't stay mad. He's your brother. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The audacity. As if my fury was some tantrum I'd eventually grow out of, like they always believed. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new email draft and began attaching files, photos, receipts, invoices, to my insurance company. I had insured the greenhouse for theft and vandalism, though at the time I'd thought only of storms and stray teenagers, not my own flesh and blood. But what was he if not a vandal? What was he if not a thief who had stolen years of my effort in one night? Submitting that claim wasn't just about money. It was about establishing a record, a paper trail, a truth they couldn't bury under forgive him. Around noon, I drove to my parents' house anyway. Not for lunch, not to talk, but because part of me wanted to look them in the eye and see how far their blindness went. The kitchen smelled of roast chicken, and for a second, it almost felt normal. My father sat at the table, newspaper folded neatly, coffee steaming in his favorite mug. My mother smiled faintly, her eyes already softening in that way that begged me to relent. And there he was, my brother, leaning back in his chair, like a king, a smug grin curling his lips. He didn't even flinch when I walked in. Feeling better? He asked casually, as if he hadn't torn apart my livelihood. I set the folder on the table with a heavy thud. Papers spilled out, photographs sliding across the polished wood. His grin faltered when he saw his boots in one of the photos, lying in the mud by the ruins. "This is what you did," I said evenly, my voice steady, controlled. "This is $22,000 of destruction. This is my future you tried to erase." My parents shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. My father cleared his throat, ready with the same old line. "Sweetheart, it's just money. He's your brother. Don't throw away family over a mistake." I leaned forward, my palms flat against the table, and let the silence stretch until it felt unbearable. Then I said the words that had been forming all night. "No. This time, you don't get to tell me how to feel. This time, there will be consequences." My brother's smirk flickered, but he covered it with a laugh, the kind of hollow sound he always used when he wanted to brush things off, to pretend it wasn't serious. "Consequences?" he scoffed, leaning back and spreading his arms. "What are you gonna do, sue me? We're family. You wouldn't dare." He was so sure, so arrogant, so accustomed to the safety net our parents had woven under him since birth. He truly believed he was untouchable. My father shook his head, his voice calm, but edged with warnings. "You're overreacting. You don't go to war with your own blood." My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling as if she could still pull me back into line. "Honey, please. We can't handle another family fight. Just let this go before it destroys us." "Destroys us?" I almost laughed at that. Did they not see that I was the one destroyed? The one standing in ruins, while they passed chicken and coffee around the table, like it was any other day. My brother leaned forward, dropping his voice, his eyes glinting with challenge. "You think anyone's gonna take your side? They'll laugh at you. You're pathetic. A greenhouse girl who couldn't handle reality." Something in me hardened then. My whole life I had been waiting for their validation, craving even a scrap of fairness. But in that moment, watching their faces, I finally understood. I didn't need them to believe me. I didn't need their approval or their protection. I had facts, evidence, and more importantly, I had the truth. I closed the folder, slid it back into my bag, and stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor, cutting through the kitchen. Chatter. "You'll find out soon enough what I dare to do," I said quietly. Not a threat, not a scream, just a fact. My brother rolled his eyes, but I saw his jaw tighten, saw the flicker of doubt crack through his bravado. My father called after me as I walked toward the door. "If you do this, don't expect us to pick up the pieces. You'll be on your own." His words stopped me cold, but not in the way he intended. For the first time, the thought of being on my own didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like freedom. I turned just enough to meet his gaze, and answered, "I've been on my own all along. You just never noticed." I left them sitting at that table, their roast chicken growing, cold, their safe little world suddenly unstable. I knew they would spend the rest of the day convincing themselves that I was bluffing, that I would eventually fall back into line. But as I slid into my car and drove away, the folder heavy in the passenger seat, I already knew the next steps. The insurance company would open their investigation, and they'd see the photos, the receipts, the boots. If that wasn't enough, the police report I was drafting would be. My brother wanted to teach me a lesson. He had no idea the class had just begun. The drive to the police station felt unreal. like I was crossing an invisible line I had been circling for years, but never dared to step over. My parents' voices still rang in my ears, their pleading and scolding tangled together. Don't destroy us. Don't throw away family. You'll regret this. But with every mile I put between myself and their house, the weight on my chest lightened. For the first time in my life, I wasn't swallowing their narrative. I was writing my own. The officer at the front desk was polite, almost casual, until I laid the folder down in front of him. He flipped through the photos, the invoices, the bank statements, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. This isn't just property damage, he finally said, tapping one of the photos of the mangled irrigation system. This looks like deliberate vandalism. And you're saying it was your brother? My throat tightened, but I didn't flinch. Yes, he admitted it to my face. My parents were in the room when he did. The officer leaned back, studying me. Do you understand what you're doing by filing this report? Once it's in the system, it's not something you can just take back. I met his gaze steadily. I understand. I want to proceed. He nodded, and the sound of his pen scratching across the form felt like the closing of a door behind me. By the time I left, the report was filed, and the evidence was logged. The officer assured me an investigator would follow up, and my insurance claim would be tied to the case. Walking out into the sunlight, I felt shaky, but not from fear. From relief. For once, I wasn't letting them bury what happened under. Forgive and forget. That night, my phone lit up with missed calls. Mom, Dad, even my aunt, who had apparently been pulled into the drama already. The voicemails ranged from begging to threatening. Mom's voice cracked with tears. You're going to ruin your brother's life. How can you do this to us? Dad's tone was cold. If you go through with this, you're not welcome here again. And my brother's message, slurred with alcohol, was a sneering taunt. You think you can beat me? Go ahead, try. You'll come crawling back like always. I deleted his message without listening to the rest. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once spread out dreams and plans. And I spread out their words instead, written and recorded, little relics of a family that had chosen him over me every time. They thought I was bluffing, thought I would cave like always. But as I stared at the photos of my ruined greenhouse, I realized something they never had. When you break something, sometimes it doesn't get put back together. Sometimes it stays broken. And sometimes that's the only way to finally be free. 2 days later, the first knock came at my door. Sharp and official. Not the kind of knock family ever uses. When I opened it, 2 officers stood there, polite but firm, asking if I could walk them through everything one more time. They wanted me to take them to the greenhouse site, to point out where the damage began, where the structure collapsed, where the boots were left behind. As we stepped into my yard, I felt a strange mix of shame and vindication. Shame that my private dream had been reduced to rubble and displayed like a crime scene, but vindication that finally, someone was taking me seriously. The officers took photographs, bagged a piece of glass with his boot print still smeared in the mud, and noted the serial number on the irrigation pump he had smashed. They weren't emotional. They didn't tell me to forgive. They documented facts. And facts didn't care about family loyalty. Word spread quickly. My phone became a grenade of messages from relatives near and far, each one more furious than the last. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years called me selfish. My uncle left a voice note dripping with disdain. You don't take blood to court. Whatever he did, you settle it inside the family. It was as if they had all agreed on a script, the same one my parents had been feeding me since childhood. But I noticed something new in their voices. Fear. Fear of what would happen if their golden boy was exposed. Fear of the cracks spreading through the facade of unity they'd worked so hard to keep polished. My brother, on the other hand, didn't sound afraid at all. He showed up in my driveway one night, headlights blazing, leaning against his truck with that same smug look. You really think the cops are gonna lock me up over some glass box? He sneered when I opened the door. Go ahead, ruin the family. ruin yourself. Nobody's on your side. He expected me to cry, to plead, to crumble. Instead, I pulled out my phone, pressed record, and held it up between us. Say that again, I told him evenly. For the first time, he hesitated. His eyes darted toward the red recording light, and the swagger in his posture faltered. You're insane, he muttered, climbing back into his truck, slamming the door harder than necessary. But I had what I needed. His voice, his tone, his contempt, all captured. Evidence. When he peeled out of the driveway, leaving the smell of gasoline and arrogance in the air, I didn't chase after him. I didn't even watch him go. I just stood there in the quiet night, clutching my phone, knowing I had crossed another invisible line. He wanted me broken, silenced, erased. Instead, I was building a case he couldn't laugh away. And for the first time in years, I felt the balance beginning to shift. By the end of that week, the cracks in the family's perfect facade had turned into chasms. My parents stopped calling me directly. Instead, they used others as messengers, as if guilt would sound more convincing, coming from different voices. My aunt left a voicemail, thick with drama. Your mother hasn't eaten in days. She's sick with worry. How could you do this to her? My cousin sent a text, dripping with judgment. You're really going to ruin your brother's future over some plants. Pathetic. Each message was the same. Minimize what he did. Magnify my defiance. They didn't realize that with every attempt to shame me, they only strengthened my resolve. Because for once, their words no longer cut me open. They exposed themselves. They showed me exactly where their loyalty was. And it wasn't with me. The investigator assigned to my case called and scheduled a follow-up visit. He wanted to talk through the timeline, to clarify my brother's admission in front of our parents. I told him I could provide not only my testimony, but also recordings of my brother taunting me in my own driveway. There was a pause on the other end, then a low whistle. That'll help, he said simply. Hearing those words felt like breathing. After drowning, for once, someone wasn't dismissing me as too sensitive or dramatic. They were listening. Meanwhile, my brother doubled down on his arrogance. On social media, he posted cryptic jokes, photos of himself with friends, captioned, "Unbothered," as if mocking me publicly could erase the private reality closing in on him. But cracks were showing there too. Some people left comments asking why his sister's greenhouse had suddenly disappeared. Others hinting at whispers of a police report. I saw him snap back, calling people liars, insisting I was exaggerating. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and his charm was wilting. My parents invited me over one last time. They said it was to talk things through. But when I arrived, it was an ambush. My brother sat at the table, arms folded, smirk plastered on his face. My father's jaw was tight, his voice controlled but sharp. Drop the charges. End this now. You're tearing this family apart. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears as she whispered, Please, sweetheart, don't do this. You'll regret it forever. I looked at them, really looked, and realized something startling. They weren't pleading for the family. They were pleading for him, for their golden son, their fragile illusion, their denial. None of this was about me. Not my pain, not my work, not my $22,000. It never had been. I stood there, feeling oddly calm, and said the words I never thought I'd be strong enough to say. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. The silence that followed my words was suffocating, thick with disbelief. My brother let out a short, sharp laugh, like the sound of a cornered animal pretending not to be afraid. She's bluffing, he said, leaning back in his chair with that infuriating ease. She's always bluffing. Dad, you know her. She's too weak to follow through. But even as he said it, I saw the flicker in his eyes, the same one I'd caught in my driveway when he realized I had been recording him. My father slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gavel. Enough. This ends here. His voice wasn't directed at my brother. It was aimed at me, as though I was the problem, the one tearing the family apart. My mother's tears spilled freely then, her hands twisting in her lap. Please, honey, just take the high road. Be better than this. The high road. That phrase had been my prison for as long as I could remember. Be better meant be quiet. Be better meant take the hit while he walked away clean. Not anymore. I picked up my bag, the weight of the folder still inside it, grounding me like armor. You don't get to tell me what better looks like anymore, I said evenly. If protecting myself ruins your illusion of family, that's on you, not me. I left them sitting there, their perfect little kitchen suddenly hostile, their safe script unraveling in their hands. That night, my phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't family. It was the investigator. His tone was steady, professional. But beneath it, I sensed something heavier. We've reviewed the photos and recordings, he said. We're moving forward with charges. Property destruction, vandalism, and possibly restitution. We'll need you available for a formal statement. My heart pounded. Not from fear, but from something like justice, finally stirring after years of silence. Restitution. The word glowed in my mind like a light through the cracks. My brother thought he could erase $22,000 of my work with one tantrum. Now the system was spelling it out. He would pay. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But the balance had shifted. He would feel the weight of what he'd done. A day later, the calls from my parents grew frantic. My father's voice was cold steel over the voicemail. You're making a mistake that will haunt you. My mother's message came softer, her words trembling. Your brother's lawyer says this could ruin his record. He'll never get a good job. Please, baby, think of his future. His future. Always his. Never mine. Not once had they worried about how I would rebuild, how I would pay back the debts I had taken on for the greenhouse. My future had never been the priority. But now, for the first time, it was. When the official letter arrived, stamped and sealed, I sat with it in my lap for a long time before opening it. My hands didn't shake this time. They were steady, controlled. The county was pressing charges. My brother was to appear in court for property destruction and vandalism. There it was, in black and white. Not a family argument or some petty sibling fight, but the law stepping in, where my parents never had. I half expected to feel guilty, the way they had trained me to my entire life, but I didn't. I felt a quiet, searing relief. Finally, someone else had named what he had done. The fallout was immediate. My parents showed up at my doorstep without calling, their faces lined with panic. My mother clutched her purse like it was a lifeline, her voice breaking before she even stepped inside. They're going to make an example of him. You have to do something. You have to fix this. My father stood stiff behind her, his tone cold as stone. Drop it. We'll pay you back. Whatever the money is, we'll cover it. Just withdraw your statement. I stared at them, letting the words hang in the air. They thought this was about money, as if $22,000 could buy back the years of being silenced, erased, dismissed. You don't understand, I finally said. It's not just about the greenhouse. It's about every single time you chose him over me. Every single time you told me to forgive while he destroyed things without consequence. This is the line. My mother sobbed into her hands. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with a mixture of fury and fear. If you go through with this, you're not our daughter anymore, he hissed. My heart clenched, but I didn't flinch. Then maybe you never really saw me as your daughter in the first place, I said softly. The door closed behind them, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of freedom heavier than the weight of family obligation. News spread quickly in town. People who had always looked at my brother as charming and carefree began whispering. The investigator had taken my photos, my receipts, my recordings, and they were now evidence in a case people couldn't ignore. Neighbors who once praised my parents for raising such a close-knit family started asking quiet questions. And my brother, he panicked in his own way. By doubling down, he posted photos online of himself drinking with friends, captions, bragging that nothing could touch him. But beneath the bravado, there was something hollow. People noticed. Comments shifted from praise to suspicion. Even his closest friends began to pull back, afraid of being tied to the mess. Late one night, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from him. You think you've won. This isn't over. I stared at the words, waiting for the fear that used to grip me. But nothing came. Just calm, steady clarity. He was right about one thing. It wasn't over, but not in the way he thought. Court dates have a way of stripping away the illusion that everything is fine. My brother strutted into the courthouse on the first hearing day like it was some kind of performance, wearing his best jacket, chin high, flashing smirks at anyone who dared look at him. My parents flanked him like loyal bodyguards. My mother, whispering prayers under her breath. My father glaring at me across the hallway, as if I were the criminal. But the confidence on their faces didn't last long. The judge read out the charges, the estimated damages, the photographs of the wreckage projected onto the courtroom screen. $22,000 wasn't just a number when enlarged. Images of broken beams and shattered glass glared down from the wall. It was proof. It was undeniable. My brother laughed under his breath, muttering something about me being dramatic. But the judge silenced him sharply, noting his lack of remorse. That was the first crack. I watched his posture stiffen, his smile falter when the judge spoke of potential restitution and a permanent mark on his record. My parents shifted uneasily, their rehearsed composure beginning to unravel. Afterward, they cornered me in the hallway, desperation oozing from every word. "Please," my mother begged, her eyes red and swollen. "Just tell them you exaggerated. Say you overreacted. Don't let them take this any further." My father's voice was lower, angrier. "You think humiliating him in public will make you stronger. All you've done is shame this family." I stared at them, feeling a strange mixture of grief and clarity. They were still clinging to the old script, but the world outside our walls didn't care about their script anymore. The law didn't bend for golden children. That night, alone in my house, I sat with the official paperwork in my hands. Restitution was no longer a distant hope. It was becoming reality. The court had ordered an assessment of damages, and my brother would be held accountable. $22,000. He had thought smashing my greenhouse would teach me my place. Instead, it was teaching him his. The weeks that followed were a slow grinding undoing of everything my brother thought he was untouchable for. At first, he wore his arrogance like armor, showing up to hearings with that crooked grin, making snide remarks to anyone within earshot about how the system was a joke and how no real judge would ruin a man's life over a greenhouse. But arrogance doesn't hold up well against evidence. With every session, the folder I had so carefully built grew heavier with credibility. The insurance assessor testified about the damages, listing them one by one, each item tagged with a dollar amount that added up like a drumbeat. Irrigation system, $4,300. Shattered panes, $7,600. Structural collapse, $6,000. Seedlings and soil, $2,100. The numbers stacked until the courtroom was silent, until even my brother's smirk seemed to falter under the weight of the truth. $22,000 wasn't just a figure anymore. It was a ledger of his recklessness. My parents sat behind him, stiff as statues. My mother clutched her rosary so hard, I thought the beads might snap, whispering prayers that sounded more like bargaining than faith. My father refused to look at me, his jaw locked tight, but I saw his knuckles white on the bench. For the first time, their son was facing something they couldn't pay away or scold into silence. Outside the courtroom, the whispers had started to spread. Neighbors who once praised my brother as charming began asking quiet questions. Employers he'd casually leaned on for odd jobs suddenly seemed less eager to return his calls. Even his closest drinking buddies, the ones who used to echo his jokes, began pulling away, not wanting to get dragged into his storm. And he knew it. His text to me shifted from taunting to desperate. At first, "You think this is going to break me? I'll come out fine." Then later, "Maybe we can work something out. You don't need to push it this far." And finally, "Please, don't let them ruin my record. I can't come back from that." Each message was a small fracture in his invincible facade, proof that the golden boy was finally feeling heat for the first time in his life. But my parents didn't see it that way. To them, I was still the villain. They came to my house one evening, faces pale, eyes hollow. My mother broke first, her voice ragged. "He'll lose everything. No job, no future, no chance. You're destroying your own brother. How can you live with yourself?" I listened quietly, my hand steady on the back of a chair. Then I asked her the question that had burned in me since the day my greenhouse fell. "And when he destroyed everything I built, did you ask him how he could live with himself?" She opened her mouth, but no words came, only tears. My father stepped forward, anger spitting out in his voice. "He's your family. We raised you better than this." I felt something in me click into place then, like a door locking. "No," I said, calmly. You raised me to accept his destruction. You raised me to keep forgiving until I had nothing left. That ends now. The days blurred into a steady rhythm of hearings, paperwork, and silence from relatives who didn't know whose side to take anymore. Some whispered to me in private, admitting they admired my strength, but never loud enough for my parents to hear. Others avoided me altogether, treating me like I was contagious. My brother's swagger crumbled a little more each time the judge mentioned restitution, each time the prosecutor highlighted his lack of remorse. By the third hearing, he wasn't laughing anymore. His eyes darted nervously, his hands twisting in his lap. He looked less like a golden boy and more like what he truly was, a man who thought he could smash and stomp and walk away, finally learning that the world had walls even he couldn't charm his way through. And me? I felt myself changing too. I didn't feel like the fragile girl who once stood in the ruins of her dream, begging her family to see her pain. I felt steel in my spine. I felt clarity in my chest. For once, I wasn't asking them to recognize me. I was standing in a system, bigger than all of them. A system that cared more about evidence than excuses. Still, the cost of it pressed down at night. Loneliness crept in. The ache of knowing that every phone call from my parents now came laced with blame. That cousins and aunts and uncles saw me as the traitor who had turned against family. Sometimes I lay awake wondering if I had doomed myself to a lifetime of being the outcast. But then I remembered the wreckage, the smell of torn soil, the shards glittering like mockery under the sun. I remembered his smirk as he said, "Life's about knowing your place." And I realized this was my place, not under his thumb, not silenced by their excuses, but here, holding my ground, watching the golden boy learn what consequences felt like. The trial wasn't over. Restitution hadn't yet been ordered, but momentum had shifted, and everyone could feel it. For the first time, he was cornered. My parents were powerless, and I, after years of being dismissed, erased, diminished, was finally being heard. The final hearing was nothing like the ones before. The air in the courtroom was thicker, heavier, charged with something that felt final, like the closing of a door you knew would never open again. My brother walked in first, his once confident stride now clipped, shoulders hunched just slightly, as though the weight of weeks of scrutiny had finally started to settle on him. His suit was wrinkled, his tie too tight, his skin pale. The smirk he had worn like a shield at the beginning of all this was gone. My parents followed close behind. My mother's rosary clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. My father's face carved from stone, refusing to meet my eyes. They looked older, smaller, diminished in a way I had never seen before, as if the golden light they had spent a lifetime polishing around their son had finally begun to burn them too. When it was my turn to speak, the judge asked me to describe, one last time, what had been lost. I stood, folder in hand, and unfolded not just the receipts and photos, but my story. I told them about saving tips in a jar for years, about designing irrigation layouts on scrap paper late at night, about the lavender I planted along the edges, because I wanted peace in my sanctuary. I told them how it felt to walk out and see it all reduced to rubble, how my brother had stood in front of me without shame and declared it was a lesson I needed. My voice didn't shake, not once. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't begging. I was stating the truth, measured and unflinching. The judge listened closely, his pen still against the pad. When I finished, there was a silence so deep I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. My brother's lawyer tried to spin the narrative, called it a sibling spat that had gotten out of hand, argued that dragging it through court was an overreaction, but the evidence was undeniable. The invoices, the photographs, the recordings of his taunts, the testimony of the insurance adjuster. The judge didn't need dramatics. The facts spoke for themselves. When the verdict came, it was delivered with a clarity that cut through years of excuses. Guilty, ordered to pay restitution in full, $22,000, to be garnished from his wages until it was paid, with additional fines for vandalism and community service, mandated by the court. The words fell like stones, each one sealing a future my brother had never thought he'd face. His mouth opened, but no sound came. His face, once so smug, drained of color. For the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before: fear. My mother gasped, as though she had been struck. My father clenched his fists, his face darkening, but neither of them could move, because they knew there was nothing they could do. Their golden boy was finally accountable, and it wasn't their choice anymore. The courtroom emptied slowly, people whispering as they passed. I stayed seated, my folder closed in my lap, my hands calm. My brother avoided my eyes as he was escorted out by the bailiff, his parents shuffling behind him, looking shattered. For years, I had been told to forgive, to bend, to absorb the blows, and keep the family intact. Now the family they had tried to protect so fiercely was crumbling in their hands. And I wasn't the one breaking it. They had done that themselves, piece by piece, every time they chose him over me. Outside the courthouse, the air was bright, the sun unforgiving. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't need to read to know the contents. Accusations, pleas, condemnations. But I didn't feel the familiar pull of guilt. I felt light. I felt steady. I walked past reporters asking questions, past neighbors, pretending not to stare, past relatives who couldn't even meet my gaze. I walked into a future that for once was mine. In the weeks that followed, the ripples spread further than I expected. My brother's reputation in town collapsed almost overnight. Employers who once overlooked his laziness now shut their doors. Friends who once laughed at his jokes stopped answering his calls. The charm he had wielded so carelessly evaporated when backed by a criminal record and $22,000 in debt. He moved back in with my parents, who whispered bitterly about how I had ruined him. But even their voices sounded hollow. They had built him into a monument of excuses, and now they were left worshipping the rubble. As for me, I rebuilt, slowly, carefully, piece by piece. I didn't have $22,000 yet, not in my hands, but I had something better, restitution that would come in steady payments, like bricks being laid back into my foundation. Each check was a reminder that he hadn't destroyed me. He had funded my new beginning. I built again, not just the greenhouse, but a life where my worth wasn't measured against how much destruction I could forgive. I built with steel in my spine and fire in my chest. My parents didn't come to see it. They stayed in their world of denial, clinging to the myth of their broken son. But neighbors came, friends came, people who had once dismissed me as the quiet, obedient one, now stopped by to ask questions, to marvel at the rows of green thriving under glass, to tell me they admired my strength. And late at night, when the greenhouse glowed softly in the dark, I would walk between the rows, touch the lavender brushing against my fingertips, and remember the wreckage. I remembered the shards crunching under my shoes, my parents' voices demanding forgiveness, my brother's smirk daring me to know my place. And I smiled, because I had found my place. Not in their script, not under their thumb, but here, rooted, unbroken, thriving. People ask me if I regret it. If I regret cutting myself off from my family. If I regret watching my brother fall. And the answer is always the same. I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret demanding consequences. I don't regret proving, once and for all, that my dreams, my work, my future mattered. My revenge wasn't loud or cruel. It wasn't a scream or a fight. It was evidence. It was truth. It was watching him learn, finally, what accountability feels like. And it was walking away, free, into a life I built with my own two hands.